Nathan Hale's turnaround room, it's really a terrific concept. For me, I see it as an alternative to suspending kids. And I really believe that that's how the two ladies who run the room, Pat and Donna, that's part of their philosophy of that room. They see it as a place where kids can come and experience it as a psychologically safe place to be, where if they're having difficulties in a classroom, let's say a child is just losing it for whatever reason in the classroom. We all know that kids have bad days, teachers have bad days, and sometimes, unfortunately, a trigger in the classroom could just cause a kid to act out. And if that child is acting out and the teacher feels that he or she cannot manage that child at that point with everybody else in the room, then that child is able to leave and go to the turnaround room and just relax and reflect. And what these two ladies do in that room, they give the student an opportunity to literally consider the event. What happened? What did you do? What drove you to behave the way that you did? But more importantly, what could you have done differently? And even to ask, what did the teacher do? And what do you think the teacher could have done differently? So it's almost a do-over, given an opportunity for a do-over. It's interesting in terms of tying this. I was actually in another school that's doing Comer, the Jepson School. And we were talking about those 6 developmental pathways. And one little boy actually described it this way. He said, the thing I like about the pathways is that my teacher uses the pathways. And honestly, we don't always behave properly. We don't. We act out sometimes. He was so articulate and honest. He said we act out sometimes, but you know what? Because of the pathways, our teacher gives us the chance to turn it around. She gives us the chance to turn our behaviors around. And when I heard that young man said that, it was a 5th grader from Jepson School who said that, I immediately thought about the turnaround room at Nathan Hale, because that is exactly the philosophy of the turnaround room, giving students a chance to turn their behaviors around without punishing them, but allowing them the opportunity for reflection. Think about your own behavior. What happened? But what could you do differently? And if something similar happens in the future, what will you do? Will you make the same mistake, or will you think differently? So it's a growth opportunity. It's a developmental opportunity. And that's, for me, one of the key philosophies of that room. Now, in terms of the startup of the room, when I talked to Pat and Donna about what caused them to open this room, they actually went back to the professional development that they got from the SDP staff. And they actually talked about when we got to Nathan Hale to do on-site training for them. When they were introduced to the 6 developmental pathways, they said it was presented to them with they said, Dr. Faye, the passion that you delivered this whole content with. It wasn't just the knowledge that you brought to the table, it was the passion. And when it was all over and we looked at the documents you gave us, we looked at the content that we went over, but then we felt the passion being contagious. And we were like, we have got to do something that can demonstrate that we got it. We got this 6 developmental pathways. We got it, how it's going to affect in a positive way the lives of students. And we have to find a very distinct way of making that come alive. And so together, just the 2 of them, they put their heads together and working in the Read 180 room, because they had the room there before as the Read 180 room for kids who were coming there to really deepen their reading skills or to ameliorate the difficulties that they were having with reading. So the room was there, it was beautifully decorated, and they thought, since we have the space, let's thread development through everything that we do. Because when they understood the importance of development as the foundation for what they do, to think of kids differently, to think of them through the lens of those 6 developmental pathways, when they got that understanding, they thought, here is how we could link this to what we're already doing in the Read 180 room. Pat and Donna creatively came up with something that I have not seen anyplace else. They wanted to have the 6 developmental pathways come alive in the turnaround room, and so they did it in the form of a developmental pathways tree. They actually called it the Comer Pathways Tree. And the tree has 6 branches, each branch representing one of the 6 developmental pathways. And on the tree, they actually had a card that defined each of the pathways. And then under each of those pathways, they had the kids use index cards. And the kids would write on a particular day if they had a situation. Let's say that 2 students had a disagreement. One of them would write, or maybe both of them would write, Johnny and I had an argument. So this was bothering us along the social pathway. But we didn't get into a physical fight, so we were ethical boys. And in the end, we felt good about ourselves. And so the teacher would actually say to them, so now you have captured 3 pathways. Which ones? And they would literally say, oh, when they read it, oh, we could see the ethical pathway, the social pathway, and the psychological pathway. And they would put it under one of those pathways, one of those branches. Or they would perhaps do something that just really connected to one pathway. The whole notion here was to really help the kids to understand the 6 pathways, but to understand themselves through the lens of the pathways, to understand how decisions are made, and when they make decisions, that decisions have consequences, and that those decisions really can have an impact on them and their classmates along any or all of those 6 pathways. So it was really a chance to help the kids to really develop their own capacity for behaving in socially appropriate ways along each of those 6 pathways, or just to think about life's choices as they really impact themselves and impact others along all of those pathways. So it was a great opportunity for kids to learn about the pathways in experiential ways. Now, another thing that's important about the turnaround room was the opportunity to have kids reflect, using what they call their reflection form. So they created a form that allowed the student and also allowed the teachers to look at the same situation and explain it according to their own perspectives. So the student would have a chance to sit there and write about the incident that would send him or her to the turnaround room in the first place. And so they would sit and write out what happened. You know, here is what I did. Here is what triggered that behavior. But here is what, now that I have a chance to think about it, here is what I could have done differently. Now the teacher also is asked to do the same thing, to think about what happened why you had to send this child out of the room. From your perspective as a teacher, what happened? What did you do? What did the student do? But I think in this case, even more importantly, what did you do as a teacher? And if you had a chance to do it differently, what would you do differently? So that kind of opportunity for both persons, the teacher and the students, or the teacher and the student, to reflect on that same behavior, it gives you perspectives, and it allows you to see how sometimes 2 persons can see the same situation so differently, but the action that both take really can either help to lessen the problem or to really exaggerate the problem. And so that's something that, it's, again, for me, it's a growth opportunity. So I see the turnaround room as a place that allows kids to reflect for changing a behavior that has happened, but also as a place for thinking about, in the future, if I encounter something similar, how should I behave? Because this is not just something that is going to affect me here at school as a student, but this is also something that's helping me to really develop as a person. And that is an important element of the turnaround room.